Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Queensland Transport and Logistics Council's 5th Future Freight Energy Hub webinar. We'll just give ourselves one more minute waiting for our attendees to join. We've got over 60 people coming today, so grab a tea or coffee or a glass of water. We're going to get this done in under an hour, so it'll go pretty quick, but we'll give ourselves an extra minute, please. I think we'll kick off anyway while we're waiting for everyone to join us. So thank you everyone for joining us. It's our 5th webinar for Queensland Transport and Logistics Council's Future Freight Energy Hub. So that's an initiative we set up 4 years ago to share stories, case studies, all sorts of strange and wonderful things on the journey to decarbonisation, stretching right from efficiency to electric trucks, hydrogen, and today we're talking about renewable fuel. So we've got some fantastic speakers lined up to talk to you, but firstly some housekeeping. Just a quick memo to know that we are recording this and we will download that footage and upload it on our website to share with those who couldn't join us today. So we've got you all muted in the interim. So while our presenters speak, we'll have you on mute, but we've provided 15 minutes at the back end where we're going to open the floor for questions. If you've got questions as we go, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll try and answer them as we go, just to make sure that we get through as many questions as we can that come from the floor. That's what it's about. We have 3 presenters this morning. We've got Jordan Grunfeld from Movement. He's back from the United States and he's got some really interesting insights in what's happening over there. So we're going to get him to lay the scene of what is happening, followed by Gus over at Australia Post, who's got a pretty cool trial that we're going to talk about. And right here outside of Brisbane, another interesting project shaping up with CalFresh, and we'll get them to talk about what they're doing from an ag perspective and on-road trucks. So without further ado, I'll kick off. And Jordan, if I'll ask you to set the scene in terms of what's happening.
Thanks, Lauren. Well, I'm sure we all know why we're here in terms of the diesel price volatility and some of the risk to supply is causing more fleets to look at what options there are. As well as the broader context of decarbonisation. So really lucky to have some leaders here today at CalFresh and Australia Post, but I'll just set the scene if you can start with the next slide. Thanks, Mark. So looking at the use of liquid fuels, obviously the focus is now squarely on diesel. Diesel use has doubled over the decade. Petrol use is declining. Petrol has clear opportunities with electrification, particularly where it's used in passenger cars, which is the main application. But obviously diesel being used in trucks and farm equipment, construction, has longer lived assets, and electrification's far more difficult. So renewable fuels really presents an opportunity, an option for all vehicle types. So next slide there, Mark. Look, NACFI's got a really good graph. As Lauren mentioned, I was over in the US just last month at the ACT Expo, and NACFI and others presented on the broad range of opportunities to decarbonise, and really renewable fuels has a very good opportunity that's been looked at quite successfully in the US. So the graph there on the side looks at battery electric vehicles, it looks at fuel cells, but really the bottom right shows that for renewable fuels, it's got a broad range of applications across larger trucks as well as trucks that travel further, like line haul. So renewable diesel and renewable natural gas, which we'll look at today, have, as I said, a much broader application as well as immediate opportunity, particularly for drop-in fuels. So next slide there, Mark. I suppose the way that we look at this is through the lens of combustion as compared to electrification. So renewable fuels sit within that combustion spectrum, and going across from the left-hand side to the right-hand side, you've obviously got diesel, which has got the most amount of emissions followed by natural gas. And as we work our way down through to renewable fuels, we get greater and greater opportunity to reduce emissions, perhaps even negative emissions, which is a hard concept for most from a life cycle basis. And what's important to remember here is it's not just the tailpipe through combustion, it's actually how the fuel was created. And if it can sequester, if it can absorb greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere, it offsets those emissions when they're combusted. So that life cycle and how they're produced is really important. And obviously on the right-hand side, we've got electricity. Obviously that can be renewable, but that requires a whole brand new drive chain. So renewable fuels can actually adopt the same combustion drivetrain and be adopted more readily. So we skip to the next slide. Look, as I said, the focus today is renewable diesel and renewable natural gas, Australia Post and CalFresh. There are other biofuels which have got blend walls and have got limitations, as well as uncertain greenhouse gas benefits, as well as green hydrogen that can be combusted. But we won't go into those. But ultimately, most of these fuels have, I suppose, failed to scale due to high production costs, and that's due to scale, and as well as lack of consistent policy. So I think we're really now at a turning point with these leaders that we could follow in the footsteps of other international jurisdictions like US and Europe. So I'll lead into the next slide. What I saw, as Lauren marked when I was over in the US, was actually a surprisingly high adoption of renewable fuels. It's quite unusual for us, but for them, for over a decade, they've been producing renewable natural gas, renewable diesel, and they've had subsidies in place. And what's clear, looking at the situation in California, is the reason why it's used is that the price is pretty much the same per gallon as diesel. And you can see here that the blue renewable diesel price is the same as the yellow diesel price in California. And that's due to a $2 to $4 gallon subsidy. In contrast, as Gus from Australia Post will share, the renewable diesel price is approximately double that in Australia. It's more like $4 a litre compared to $2 now. So without subsidy, it's been a very hard proposition. But what we're looking at now is just a few months ago, Ampol has received a grant for the first production of renewable diesel at Litre refinery here in Brisbane, quite a small scale, 20 million litres a year to be ready from 2028. And hopefully that's going to allow the use of some of the domestic feedstocks, and perhaps with some price support is going to make it more accessible for more fleets. So that's the renewable diesel side, and I'll let Gus speak to that more. But renewable natural gas, again, whilst we've had significant experience with compressed natural gas, particularly in bus fleets in Australia, reflecting back on the graph I showed before, greenhouse benefits aren't that great, but renewable natural gas is actually very exciting in that it provides the ability to achieve net zero from an accounting perspective, if not even negative emissions. And whilst I suppose biomethane, biogas is something that we're familiar with in Australia, it's generally been used for stationary generation, whilst biomethane in the US has many dozens, if not hundreds, of sources of production. So you can see here in the graph over the last 5 years alone, renewable natural gas use has doubled, and this has been in line with the production. And we can see, particularly around the Midwest there in the US, a very large amount of renewable natural gas being produced from agricultural waste feedstocks. And one of the talks I went to at the ACT Expo, I think it was Paper Transport International, they're running hundreds of kilometres. They've got public refueling opportunities. They've got private. They've got fleets of, I know, dozens and dozens of trucks. and it's very much business as usual, more than half the fleet. And certainly with prices at half the cost of diesel, perhaps even less now with the price of diesel, it's a very attractive proposition. So with the right support on the supply side, the similar thing could happen here quite readily. And this on the, I think there's one more. So I suppose just introducing Richard Gorman's presentation from CalFresh. We haven't seen the same sorts of supply here yet in Australia. There is one facility down in Malabar in New South Wales. But at the start of the year, CalFresh announced its plans for funding a bioenergy precinct, which is going to bring biomethane for use for a lot of applications, but one of them being transport. So look, it's as I said, an exciting story. There's a great opportunity, but I think we can look to overseas, whether it's the US or Europe, to see that really the risks have greatly reduced, and with the right policy support, with the right information understanding by fleets, this too could be a scalable opportunity here in Australia, and one that could certainly exceed decarbonisation from electrification due to its ability to be used in existing fleets. So with much further ado, I'll introduce Gus Worthy from Australia Post and get some real world application of these sort of fuels, and hopefully some really good information that we can all learn from.
Thanks, Jordan. Just give me 1 minute while I bring my slides up. Somebody can confirm they can see that, please. Yeah, thumbs up. Wonderful. Yeah, so thanks, Jordan. And thanks, Lauren, as well, for the invitation to come and speak to you all this morning. So yeah, here at AusPost, we've been running renewable diesel out of our Redbank facility in Queensland. We've had that for about 8 months as part of a 12-month trial. So I'll kind of talk you through a little bit this morning about how that's working, the successes we've seen, and obviously some of the challenges with scale up, and Jordan's alluded to some of those already. I just want to start by stepping back and kind of setting the scene a little bit as to why we opted to go for renewable diesel out of all the different options that we've looked at this morning. So I can get my slides to move forward. So earlier this year, we published our 2030 sustainability and emissions targets. And you can see there's a couple on there around our property and energy use. So increasing solar, buying renewable matched electricity, maintaining our scope 3 or indirect emissions. But the one that's most relevant to today, most relevant to renewable diesel is that one at the top, which is to cut our scope 1, so our direct emissions, by 8% by 2030, by 2025. We've called it an additional 8%, but the reality is historically we've not really made inroads into reducing those direct emissions. So whether 8% sounds like a lot or not, I can certainly say internally it is a very ambitious target for us to achieve. And when we look at where those emissions come from, 91% of our direct emissions is from our transport fleet. And then within that, at the bottom, we can see there's a small amount from our light vehicles, so 4% from petrol in our light vehicles, 11% from diesel in the light vehicles. But the vast majority of the emissions that we need to start cutting back on is diesel in our heavy vehicle fleet, which is by far the hardest area of the transport operation to decarbonise based on current technology. As a business, we use about 40 million litres of diesel a year. So that puts into perspective that 8% is actually quite a significant amount when you're talking about, I don't know, more, yeah, almost 4 million litres of diesel that we need to find an alternative fuel source for. We operate a really diverse fleet, all the way down from our 2- and 3-wheel final mile delivery vehicles right up to the prime movers. And so this means there's no silver bullet, there's no single technology that's going to get us the emissions cuts that we need. across that mix of assets. We are well underway with electrifying the lighter duty vehicles. We want to have all our petrol motorcycles out of the fleet by 2030 and replaced with the electric three-wheelers. On the vans, we've got about 36 of the Mercedes Vitos in the fleet, and they're working really well, particularly in metro areas, and we'll be scaling that up over the next few years. As we get into the rigid, this is where the electrification starts to run into some challenges around cost, product availability, and load constraints as well. And then up in the prime movers, there are electric vehicles available on the market in that segment. But for line haul, for the type of operation we do, that's not really an option at this stage. We can't afford the loss of payload, and we can't have the vehicles off the road for hours while they're charging. So we then look at that and say, well, we could either not decarbonise those trucks, park that as too hard for a few years, or we could look at other options. And having reviewed the various technologies out there, be that gas, hydrogen, etc., in our view, the renewable diesel is the only viable technology if we want to get scale emissions reductions from long haul heavy duty trucks. So that's kind of the reason why we've opted for renewable diesel. In terms of what we mean by the fuel, Jordan sort of covered a little bit of this already, but just to go over that again, we're talking about a fuel made from waste-based feedstocks. So taking products like used cooking oil or tallow, so an animal fat product, putting those through a process. I'm not a chemist or an engineer, so I won't pretend to explain that bit in the middle. But the fuel that comes out is effectively a drop-in fuel, which is chemically similar, effectively chemically identical to fossil diesel. It being a drop-in fuel is really the key benefit for us. It means it goes into our fuel bunkers at the depot in exactly the same way regular diesel would. There's no modifications to the infrastructure. There's no modifications to the bowsers. It's then dispensed straight into our vehicles. Again, no modifications to the tanks, the powertrain, any aspect of the vehicles. We use it exactly as we would with regular mineral diesel. The fuel we're using is produced in Malaysia. It's imported as a 100% blend. It's then combined with conventional diesel and delivered to us as a blended product. And that can be at varying ratios from 5%, 10%, all the way up to 100% diesel. It doesn't matter in terms of how it's used. The blend doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The second key benefit, of course, is the reduced emissions. And it's the fact that it's got those waste-based inputs. So at the point the fuel is used, the tailpipe emissions, they're the same. What we're really interested in is the life cycle upstream emissions benefit, which can be in the region of 90% compared to mineral diesel. Interestingly, the certificates we get from the fuel have a different emissions factor or a different emissions benefit compared to the factor that's provided by the government for our emissions reporting. So there is just a note to sort of be careful with that. The fuel itself, the figure is lower than the figure that's provided, but we'll obviously report that lower figure based on the fuel that we're actually receiving. For this trial, it's a 12-month piece of work. We started our first delivery in November last year into Redbank, and that'll run through until October this year. The depot gets through about 5 million litres of diesel in a year altogether, and Ampol are supplying us with that fuel and including as part of that 500,000 litres of renewable diesel. And we're simply spreading that 500,000 litres out over 12 months, meaning that the fuel we're using is effectively an R10, so a 10% blend. That's purely driven by those volumes. It's not an operational decision. As I say, from our point of view, we would be happy to use stronger blends in the infrastructure and the vehicles with no concerns on fuel consumption, maintenance, operational changes, etc. And so over the course of the year, we're looking to save around about 900 to 950 tonnes of carbon from that fuel. It's being used today. If you see one of our prime movers running around in Brisbane or Queensland today, that will have a 10% blend in the tank across metro, regional and line haul routes. Ideally, you want to obviously focus it on line haul, where you get the maximum benefit, and other technologies like electrification aren't viable, but it will just go into all of those tanks and be used on a mix of journeys. What does it cost? No capital cost. As I said a few times, no investment in vehicles, no investment in infrastructure, so that's nice. For the trial, this was all covered under our existing Ampol supply contract, so I can't put a dollar value on what we're spending for those 500,000 litres. Yeah, just a quick thank you while I mention them to Ampol, who did a super job of setting up the trial, walking us through it, answering our questions around technical specifications, etc. Moving forward, if we did want to purchase more of this, we are looking at around about $2 a litre premium over diesel, which with diesel prices as they are, and with the margins that we all operate on in the logistics sector, that is clearly a challenge. For us, we're what's called a GBE, so a government-backed enterprise, and therefore we have to align with what the government is doing on wider emissions targets, and that does give us a mandate to invest money where we need to in technologies to reduce emissions, but it's obviously it's something we have to absorb. It's not a cost we can pass through to our customers. What I would say, just to put a more positive spin on that, is if you look at it from a cost per litre, that's clearly expensive, doubling the cost of fuel consumption. If you look at it on a cost of abatement basis and then compare it against other technologies like hydrogen, like electrification, it does come out fairly favourably. So if you have got a commitment to reduce emissions, this, in my view, is the option to go for the heavier end of the market. So final points, successes and challenges. Overall, it's absolutely been a success for us. We've seen about an 8% reduction of our emissions at that local depot, with a technology that is effectively so easy to use, no impact on fuel use, no impact on maintenance, no staff training, no new infrastructure. Yeah, just comes in, goes in the vehicles, and on a day-to-day basis, you can't tell that anything different is happening. It absolutely fills that gap where electrification isn't viable yet, especially on the heavier duty long-haul vehicles. I don't see how we will reach that 8% target that I mentioned at the start by 2030 without using more renewable diesel. So it's absolutely part of our pathway going forward, and probably beyond that date as well, until we see improved technology and reduced costs in true zero tailpipe emission options. The challenges, clearly, as I said, that cost is the biggest challenge by far. There's no payback, so it is just an investment in abating emissions, but it is a cost-effective option compared to what else is out there. I think for us, we're keen to scale this up within Post, and I think there is potential to see it scaled up more broadly across Australia as well. To do that, increased fleet demand is going to be key, as with any product. If we can get demand up, then we would expect to see the unit cost of production come down. We'd like to see domestic production of the fuel. Great to hear that there's the grant that's been provided in Queensland to kickstart that process. That's partly a cost thing, it's partly an economic benefit, but for us, it's mainly about supply and the security of that supply. So if we're relying on the fuel to hit our emissions targets, we don't want to be beholden to competing on a global market with fuel that other countries will be trying to get hold of as well. And finally, I do think there's a requirement for additional support and incentives for fleets and end users. Even with the measures that I've discussed there, that there's going to be that cost premium. I know there's a package of measures that's been announced to support production and supply, but if the federal government wants businesses and organisations to invest and help them achieve their emissions targets, I would hope to see whether it's tax benefits or some other form of incentive to help close that gate price to mineral diesel. So yeah, that's all from me. I don't want to end on a sort of a down note. So I'd say overall it's been a massive success. Definitely fuel we'll use again in the future. And yeah, happy to take any questions on that at the end of the session.
What an amazing success, Gus, and thank you for sharing the trial with us. There's a few questions that have gone up in the Q&A. So if you're able to address those to the best of your knowledge, if you can. I know there are a bundle of Ampol and Iowa and other fuel distributors and providers also on board. So if you're in the audience and you know you're a chemist and you know the answers to those questions, feel free to jump in and answer them on Gus and our behalf. So this is about putting people in touch with other people who are doing great things. So Gus, I think interesting times to start a trial on this technology in Australia, given our vulnerability on fuel and the cost scenario that's going on board. But we'll take some of the questions on notice. Gus will try and answer them as we go. And let's move, if we can, to Richard and Alice Gorman over at CalFresh. Another really interesting story and initiative, which probably flies under the radar a little bit, but not just the footprint of what they're doing now, but what their plans are to come is pretty inspiring and interesting from the whole of supply chain costs. So I'll give the floor to you now, Richard, if you can introduce and tell us a little bit more about what you guys are up to over at Calbar.
Yeah, sure. And then you'll share my presentation. Yep. Hello. CalFresh, we were established in 1992. We're a Queensland-based vertically integrated farming business. We focus mostly on vegetables, daily delivery to customers, retailers, predominantly domestically. Think Woolworths, Coles, Aldi, Costco. Also export between 10 and 15% of what we grow to markets, Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, Japan. Why we're here today is we're building a bioenergy facility. Can you just flick a few slides in, please? And what we're doing here is we're going to transform like the food and some of our farming waste and also crops that we grow in between our vegetable crops. They're like a rotational energy crop, so they're an addition to our farming program. And so by mid-2027, we'll be producing our first renewable natural gas. It's a biomethane fuel, as was mentioned earlier. Look, it's not, just go back a couple of slides, please. One more. It's not a niche, it's a mature, proven technology. It's already fueling trucks. Just one slide ahead, please. This one. So some of the world's most recognised companies, they're already running significant fleets on RNG in Europe and the US. So that's what encouraged us to look into that technology. The next slide, please. So what we're actually building is a precinct. So it's an industrial subdivision, and that's about not just for our company, but anyone who needs to process agricultural products. We're creating 16 industrial lots. The centrepiece is the bioenergy facility. State government came in and coordinated the approvals that's required to not just build the precinct, but also the bioenergy facility. There are a lot of firsts in doing that work. So, we're very thankful for the help we've got. Now, the feedstocks or what you feed into this plant isn't just what we produce from our waste. There's a lot of waste from other people, other industries that process food in the area. Think abattoirs, think chicken, poultry sheds. And out of it, we get not just renewable natural gas. We get a biogenic CO2 for the market. We get a lot of good fertiliser. So we already use a lot of renewable fertiliser or think compost in our farming system. So 80% of the nutrition we use is now organic. So and also electricity is another major byproduct. So we're not stuck with one thing to sell. The project that we've managed to get approval for is quite a large one, and if you were to compare it to sites in and around the world, we'd be in the top 5% by the time we build this one out. And because of the system we've worked with around the methodology, there's up to 430,000 tonnes of net carbon emissions fully built out. And a lot of that's driven just by the plants we grow in rotation are really quite aggressive biomass builders. That just means they use a lot of CO2 when they grow. There's just a few key numbers there on the side, fully built out. It's 1.6 petajoules of renewable natural gas at a minimum. If you were to convert all of that to power, it's 240 megawatt hours per day. That's enough to roughly power 31,000 homes, or 98 million kilometres of, a circa 400 or 500 horsepower truck. Next page, please. Sorry, back a couple, the partners. So we, for the bioenergy site, it's what we're calling a mid-tech startup. So it's quite different to our normal business as usual food business. So we didn't want to tackle this one by ourselves. So we went out to market to raise some money, and we've ended up with Wallamai Capital and QIC. They're going to take a minority position in the business, and also some of the farmland required to grow the crops, and also the food operating entity. So there's a lot of nexus between the entities to actually pull it all off. Wallamai, they're very focused on, they're a climate infrastructure investor. A lot of very smart ex-Macquarie people there, been really good working with them. And then, of course, QIC have leaned in quite heavily, along with the state government to help finance the project, just so we weren't doing all the financial heavy lifting by ourselves. Next page, please. Just a quick overview. This is how the system works. So at the centre of an anaerobic digester, there's the anaerobic digestion plant. Out of it comes the fertiliser. The fertiliser goes back to our fields. We will grow a rotational crop that comes in and it's stored on site. If anyone knows what silage is, it's just finely chopped maize corn. The yield per hectare is quite high. So, at some point you have to drive this back to how much energy can I grow per hectare per megalitre of water required. So we've designed a system that fits within our current farming system. So, approximately 10% of our offtake from the farms will go to bioenergy. Outputs, CO2 for food and drink manufacturing. Southeast Queensland has a pretty robust, solid market for CO2. That's not always the case anywhere in the world, but biogenic CO2 is definitely a good, strong, growing market. There's the RNG, which we're talking about today. So it's not a drop-in fuel, so it's a different engine and it's a different storage tank. So it's essentially a new vehicle purchase. And RNG isn't new, or CNG, which is the fossilised version. It's not new, but definitely we saw a real increase in the focus on making more efficient, more robust engines and taking advantage of the fact that there was low emissions. So as we have to bolt more and more to the engines that we use every day for our trucking and tractors, not having that bolted to the side of our engines was also attractive. You end up with a much simpler, cleaner burning fuel, which uses a simpler engine. There's electricity to the grid. That's a very traditional form of offtake for AD plants or anaerobic digesters. They use what's called a CHP unit to burn the gas, combined heat and power. So you get power out of it, and if you need heat, you also get heat. So we don't have a lot of heat use, particularly in Queensland. Heat, while it's extremely good when you're growing something, like our heat and soil and water profile for this business model is 3 to 4 times better than a lot of the places in Europe where they're established. They also get to use the heat off their power production systems, where we're going to struggle there. And then the other one is there's green gas for industry. That's a drop-in gas into people that run boilers or any sort of heavy industry. And then before we leave this page, one of the other key reasons we diversified into this, it builds very, very strong regional economies. So to grow a better farming community is our mission statement for our company. So that's probably the key driver, why we chose this over some other diversification pathways. Next slide, please. A quick overview. It's proven, right? So biomethane, there's 1,678 sites currently operating across Europe, circa 2,600 sites in America. Growth is really strong, has really picked up in both markets, 34% forecasted growth. Global market value is currently sitting around 300 billion. That, from when I first started looking at that, that was less than 100 billion. Like I think it might have been about 40. That was 8 years ago. So that's also what's given us and the state government confidence to push forward. And the US is probably growing faster than Europe now. Denmark, their entire gas grid's now 40% RNG. They've got a target of being 100% by 2040. Some of the growers from here were over there 3 weeks ago. They think they could even hit it by 2030. And it's just becoming a predominant energy article. RNG is fully compatible. Look, it's not liquid. It's compatible with CNG vehicles. You have to liquefy it to make it liquid RNG. So that's a little bit misleading there. But around Europe, digestate has replaced 17% of nitrogen-based fertilizers, 25% of phosphorus fertilizers, and 7% of potassium fertilizers. That number has grown even more. And in our business, it underpins a lower cost of production in our farming system. So, if we can take 10 or 15% of our production cost out of farming, that almost doubles our net profit per hectare. So that's a real driver for us as well. Next slide, please. Some of the big names that are participating in RNG now, there's Shell and Chevron. Like Chevron's rapidly expanding in the United States. I think there's a new engine from Cummins. It's really driving a lot of that expanded growth. It wasn't that long ago, the best engine you could get was 400 horsepower. Still had a few issues. Now you can get 500 horsepower, 1850 meters of torque, diesel comparative performance, less parts to fix, good service range, sometimes longer than diesel equivalents. This slide's just showing that, it's not just a niche group of people investing in this now. But the real players are on the next slide. Can we go to the next one, please? Clean energy fuels in America has really lent in really hard. So they do, I think that fuel stop there in the pictures at the port, that's at the LA port, where most vehicles on the port are running on RNG or CNG. Circa 88% of what clean energy sells in the world of gas now is RNG. That was up from, 20% when I first started looking 7 years ago. And then the bottom one is, that's like a site outside of Amazon in the UK. So Amazon's also, I think between Europe and America, running circa 8,000 to 10,000 trucks, prime movers just themselves, co-locate with Bowser depots like this. And that's driven around cost parity. And then CNG fuels there, the UK base, you can see they fuel up to 2,240 vehicles every day now. Next slide. It was mentioned earlier that potentially RNG has negative emissions. Depending on how it's produced, yes, that's the case. So that's absolutely our model that we've designed. So the molecule itself is identical to natural gas. It just has a much lower emissions profile. So what they call the NOx and SOx included in the emissions. So based on how you produce the renewable natural gas, e.g., how much waste did you use, how much did you divert from landfill, and how much CO2 did the crop remove from the atmosphere, and by the time you put your digestate back in the same field and you measure the growth in organic carbon in your soil, what can you validate? So based on the audit of our system, it looks like we'll be, so the goal is to be 4 or 5 times better than, say, a solar-powered electric vehicle as far as emissions profile goes. Making those emissions credits bankable is we're currently under a set methodology that is under consideration, but so far everything looks good. So if you're using RNG in a highway transport situation, there's renewable green gas credits available, and for us as on the production side, we'll have ACCUs to sell. The next slide, please. So if you're switching, how's it work? So refuel time, circa 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes if you're empty. If you've got a truck set up with a range of 8 to 1,200 kilometres, that's what you're looking at. You can use existing gas or network virtual pipeline. That's just where a truck carts the gas to a specific site. Your engine efficiency runs a lot better if you use the actual renewable natural gas instead of mixing it with a fossil natural gas. There's no payload penalty, so you can, if anything, you should be able to cart more. Comparable to diesel trucks on the upfront cost. In Australia, we'll have our first trucks purchased soon, so we're expecting a 10% premium. There's no grid dependency. RNG price per litre. Sorry, we've quoted that in US gallons. Look, here in Australia, it's going to look like it'll be equivalent of $1.80 to $2 a litre if you were to compare it to diesel. Or our goal is 80 cents or less per kilometre. Just trying to make sure it's it's not a liability to take on. Look, I just wanted to mention a couple of the trucks that we've chosen to work with. This specific engine, the 13-litre from Scania, and that vehicle there, very good engine management system, really efficient, 460 horsepower. It's probably 35 to 40 kilos of gas per 100 kilometres. Good torque. So that's a vehicle that we'll be bringing to Australia for our own transport and offering out to people who are interested to put RNG trucks in their fleet. For the longer, heavier haul, the next one is probably what's leading the American market. If we can go to the next page. So the Cummins ISX 15N. So we jumped on and went over to Cummins, had a look at this when they were developing it and getting it. They're currently apparently building 40 to 50,000 a year of these in China already. That's how they were so confident to build an engine from the ground up. We just think this one's really impressive. We run Cummins in all of our Kenworths that we run now. So we'll definitely be looking at trying to get something like this in a truck as quickly as we can. But this is sort of driving a lot of the change in America. Next slide, please. Look, what's the business case? Look, I'm just going to stick with the top left. It's cheaper than diesel when we get the system up and running. We are needing government support to get the initial infrastructure up. Not sure what of any subsidies are going to be there for us. There is capital grants, like grants to help you get the initial capital off the ground. We have, it looks like we will be using some of those. But other than that, if you're an NGAS registered entity and you need to do something about emissions, this is going to be very good technology, not going to cost you more. It's better than zero. It's not net zero. There are still some tailpipe emissions, very, very limited. But the overall accounting of it, you get to slip into a better than zero system. The future for us, last page, I'll try and wrap up quickly. If we can flick to the last page, please. So our agreement with the state government and why we brought QIC and Wallamai in, Cowboy is just the start. Like, we've done enough work on the biomass modelling. This is a highly scalable, repeatable production system. Queensland, as I said, has very good heat units, very good soil, very good water availability along the major transport and power trunk routes. We already have a lot of unutilised biomass in Queensland. So we do have to build out the gas distribution grid. There's a clear certification pathway for getting RGGOs and ACCUs credits for our system. So we're looking for long-term offtake agreements, fleet partners to help us move and scale faster. There's opportunity to partner with the state government as well to help us overcome some of those initial capital costs. And so that map there, they're currently identified areas. We already farm in the Bowen and Eyre regions, so we already have site selection and have started work with the local councils there for precinct 2 and 3. So that's us and what we're doing. So
thank you, Richard. Pretty amazing presentation. There's no shortage of questions in the chat. So when you take a breather, you can have a look at those. I think you've got an offer for some university kids to come and be part of your amazing work. So you can answer those. But there's a few ones, one particularly with regards to timing. How do you see this project, the other sites and precincts being set out in time?
So first things first, so we're currently building, so those tanks that you might see in the picture, they're 30 metres round and 10 metres high, and then there's another 5 metres on the dome. So that construction project is quite significant. So we're pouring concrete on the first bases probably early next month. We'll put the first production system together before Christmas and produce first gas, March, but we won't upgrade it till probably June. So we're taking it pretty steady and making a lot of learnings on, how to build that initial infrastructure. So at first we're just looking for, pilot vehicle options, so we've got our own transport fleet, our own transport partners, and building, pod distribution centres. So first gas is June 2027. And by then we'll also be powering our factory with it. And so you got to build out the electrical infrastructure as well as the gas at the same time. And then if CO2 upgrading comes next, like CO2 is actually easier to sell than RNG at the moment.
Crazy. I know you're very passionate about your truck engines, and you scouted the world about, what the right truck and engine was to do this, and things have even changed since you did that initial scout. Can you explain why you chose those models and specs and how that's changed? Do you see it getting better?
Yeah, the Scania engine's the most efficient. So they designed an engine that had a fuel system where it could monitor the quality of the fuel and then change the fuel use specifically for gas, which, because RNG is a cleaner, higher quality fuel than the standard pipeline gas. So it sort of operated and allowed you to get that benefit and turn it into dollars. So we were following the 9-litre version, and it's a bus engine. So we would physically go to the bus depots in Europe. So that was getting 10 to 15% more efficiency. So it's just about money. We run a fleet just like anyone else. It doesn't. You're not really interested until it saves you money. Cummins are dearer engines, but like if anyone here's bought Kenworth trucks, they try and sell you a Packard, but at the end of the day, if you want a good resale, you put a Cummins in it. And we just get good longevity out of our Cummins engines. Like we have to deliver produce between 2 and 5 in the morning every morning, 12 distribution centres every day in Australia. You just can't have failure. So between us and Nolan's Transport, we focus, but we just invest in, good equipment because it wins in the end. And Cummins, they have just put an enormous amount of energy into making that engine.
Thanks, Richard. Another really good question from Aaron in the chat we haven't covered on is what are the anticipated or real local planning restrictions or rules with bioenergy plants that you've come across?
Oh, we don't have long enough today. There was a lot. That's why you get the government involved. We went through what's called a coordinated process. So the Coordinator General of Queensland is a person and a position, and that's their job. Right, there's going to be lots of problems. We need special water rules that allow us to use water for these sort of crops, and the list is on and on and on. Now, we went from difficult engagement with the Department of Environment to they are now our partners. So the state government's our partner, particularly the Department of Environment. So because the environmental impact of these things in our local environment is so large. So the scale of replacing chemical fertiliser is extremely good for the environment. So we're like Reef Guardian farmer number 1 in North Queensland. So that's part of the program to make sure you're not putting leachate out into your waterways. So the fertiliser that we produce is very, very good for the soil. Translocates really slowly. So we focus a lot on the environmental benefits. So that's come out well, but no, it's a monumental task to get planning approval for this. And then if you go and throw an industrial precinct on top of that, it's taken us 5-6 years.
Thanks, Richard. I had a question for Gus. Gus, would you use R10 again? Would you go higher in the future, especially given the last 6 months?
Yeah, as I said in the presentation, the blend was just driven by spreading that supply out or that volume of fuel out over the year. So yeah, absolutely, we would look at a higher blend. Obviously, at the moment, the supply is kind of limited to Queensland. So if we wanted to put in more, we'd potentially be looking at higher blends in Brisbane rather than trying to spread it around to the rest of our network. So yeah, it just boils down to cost and security of supply for us.
Thank you. Guys, we had a lot of questions. I think there's still more there. I'm going to take one to the next person who wants to turn their camera on and show us that you're out there. Pop your hand up and we'll head to you. Particularly if we haven't answered your question yet in the chat, feel free to ask it now. Aaron?
No, I'm fine. No, thanks.
Oh, thank you for turning your camera on. Anyone who has asked a question that we haven't answered? Just looking through them now. I think there was a question about getting academia involved, potentially some final year engineering students. Richard, have you sought to engage with the universities and researchers through this?
Look, in the early stages, we were part of a biofuels team, which included jet fuel and things with the University of Queensland. And that was around using genetic engineering. So genetic engineering in plants, so ours is a plant-based system. It doesn't take a lot of genetic engineering to radically increase your output. So if you grow a plant and you focus, right, instead of me growing grain for animal feed, I now want to grow energy for Maize is one of the most adaptable plants, so we had a project with them. Like it ended up with 4 partners and 2 pulled out the day before. They had to put their $1 million in. Oh, that's the other thing. This has cost us $5 million just to get through the approval stage, and the building of the site out is 150. Like, it's not for the faint-hearted. Hence QIC and everyone are involved. Like, it's quite a significant investment. Around the university side, where there's a real role to play is methodology work with federal government. You know, how carbon, how ACCUs are calculated, how renewable green gas certificates are calculated. There's definitely a role for universities to play in that. And we would love to swing back to genetics, because genetic engineering, you know, for every $1 you invest there, you get 10 out. It's a 10x multiple usually.
Awesome. Thank you. One last question. Feel free to turn your camera on. We've unmuted everyone. One from Elliot Stewart above. AD efficiency and biochar opportunity. Has this been considered at all?
There's some biochar byproduct at Logan City Council that we've spent a bit of time looking at. So they create a biochar down there. We will definitely be working with it, but at the moment we can't get a large enough economic benefit out of it for our farming system. And the biochar that's available en masse is from human waste, which we can't use on vegetables. So that's our major restriction. And then from what we see, getting the solid material, we're getting about 8 to 10% solid out of what we create. That's enough for us to keep our soil improvement program going.
Oh, the question was actually more about what are you doing with your digestate? It sounded like maybe you're reusing that in the farming system, but you can actually get energy twice out of biomass by pyrolyzing your digestate, and actually makes a very good biochar because of the surface area. And then you can sell that and get a syngas stream as well, and more carbon credits.
Yeah. So with the fertilizer, our whole focus is getting it to our fields as fast and simply as possible to manage the volume, because we're quickly getting up to 100,000 tonnes of digestate to deal with. So we're setting up pumping systems and direct-to-centre pivots and trucking systems. So our goal was just to cut and paste exactly what people are using in Europe and try not to get too funky with it. Like, I've got enough challenges. We're pretty simple people at the end. We just try and do the simple stuff first. We know it's all possible. We just probably don't have the skill base to go that far.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We promised to get you out by midday, which has been a challenge given the pretty cool topics that we've got. So we are going to share these presentations with you afterwards. Hopefully, Gus and Richard will provide their contact details so that we can continue to collaborate, because we are all at the start of this journey, and getting to the end point will require all of us coming together and working together. So our view is collaboration will get us there. So I want to thank all of our speakers today. It's been fantastic talking to you. Future Freight Energy Hubs is as good as the concerns, the queries, the input that we get from you. So if you've got a topic that you would like to see covered in greater depth in future, please let us know. I'll shoot my contact details out to each of you. Wanted to thank you for everyone for coming along, particularly Richard, Gus and Jordan. So thank you.